Wonderland FM 107.1.
Hello everyone, welcome to our June episode. Winter has started. Lou, I'm afraid to say that Adam said that our last program was the very best we'd done. That was the one where we were drinking. So in future, unfortunately, darling, we are compelled to have wine with our show.
Oh, shame. Such a shame.
So Lou, last month I told a story about losing myself in a paddock. But this month you've lost something far more precious in a paddock.
Yes, it was a bit of a sad story. I was having a wonderful time. Mm-hmm. I'd gone to a workshop put on by the local land services, and it was called Healthy Farm, and it was at Avoca. Mm-hmm. And I drove into this most beautiful property. Lots of really big trees, absolutely gorgeous. And we were taken around the property and shown all the work that this owner had done to stem erosion. The property was quite hilly, up and down, and so he was worried about the water and keeping the water contained. And we had a walk with an ecologist, Steve, who I think you know, and he talked to us about the trees. There were brown barrels. The soil is delicious. It's that delicious soil. You want to eat it. It's bright red and really friable, and it's basalt. I know, I love basalt. I wish I had basalt instead of rotten old shale, but still could be worse. And so we had this lovely day, and he showed us all these devices that he had developed with the local land services. They had helped him very much, actually. He'd taken on their expertise on how to stop water just running all over paddocks and making a complete mess and splitting up banks and so forth. And in some cases, it would just be a matter of throwing a number of rocks in an area to slow down the water. And in other cases, there was a very expensive and flash-looking slope of concrete with actually holes in it, things sticking out of it. And it was at the lowest level of one of the three dams. And the water was just, because it had been very, very wet, was just pouring down that concrete slope. But then it went into a purpose-made pool where it stayed so that it could slowly move through a ditch, really, which he'd lined with gum trees. He'd planted the edges so that they would be held in place, so that there would not be all this splurging of water that would sort of break the legs of his cows and, puggle up and just horrible. So it was a lovely day, and I was so impressed how well organised it was. And I got back into my car, or actually I got to the car park, and what did I find? I found I'd lost my car keys.
Oh no!
I know. And I was...
And you'd been traipsing over paddocks
That's
all
right.
day.
All day.
Oh, Lou!
And they were all sort of tufted, and looking very good. Like, where would you look for a bunch of keys in several paddocks around several dams? But the owner, Tom, and Steve, they were very, very kind, and they walked with me the entire route we had taken that day.
Oh, Lou!
And we spread out and we looked everywhere for these wretched keys. And we never found them.
Oh, darling.
No.
So did you have to hitchhike home?
No, but I did have to ring my partner.
I bet that was well received.
I had to keep the phone a long way from my ear.
Oh,
yes.
Sweetie.
Not best pleased. No.
So I've hardly seen you this month, but one thing that we did do together was we went to the Greater Glider evening, where we heard some fabulous talks, especially one from Dr. Anna Grassinen about greater gliders up here.
Well, about hollows. I listened to it again, and it really was very in-depth about the kind of choosiness of different species for different hollows. And
Yeah.
Greater gliders requiring particularly deep.
That's right.
hollows.
Yeah, and we learnt that for wildlife to flourish, you need to have 30 hollows of different shapes and sizes per hectare.
Yeah. It's an ask, isn't it?
It
It's an
certainly
ask.
is.
We are losing trees all the time. And even though we're planting them as fast as we can go, a tree doesn't really develop hollows until it's about 150 years old.
That's right. And some of the deeper ones that the bigger animals need, she said it can take 300 years.
I like that idea now. We're making some artificial hollows for these animals. And I really like the idea of going with one that would become a hollow, but they were drilling it. So
yeah.
they were speeding up the evolutionary process by just drilling into the area to make it a good size for the right
with
animal.
a tool that was invented called the hollow hog.
The hollow hog.
Yeah.
I thought that was a misprint. I thought it was the hollow log. So that explains why it said hog. Yes. Anyhow,
I hope I'm right.
How many people know that greater gliders live here in the Southern Highlands? How many people know what a greater glider is?
Yeah, we
Sounds
should actually...
amazing.
We should try and get through this without using the word cute, because it's just the word that comes
just
to mind
used it.
every So to recap, we talked about greater gliders a month ago, but now we actually know a thing or two about them. But for those who didn't hear a month ago, these are an Australian native mammal who are about the size of a small cat. They have the most magnificent tail, which can be up to 1 metre long. They have these beautiful ears, which are very, very furry and gorgeous. And they have what they call a patagium. Is that how you pronounce it? Which goes from the elbow of the animal to their ankle so that they can glide. And they spend basically their entire lives right up in the top of the canopy eating eucalypt leaves. And they glide from tree to tree, but they rarely come to the ground because they're actually very awkward on the ground. And I read that the numbers of the population were diminishing over time, but that we lost something like 80 to 85% of them just because of the 2019-2020 fires.
We are at a really critical point right now, and in a critical place here in the Southern Highlands, where we still have animals of this calibre, and yet we are so close to Sydney and so close to Canberra, and we are so much development around us. And these animals need to move. So we're really at a crunch point now where we have to work very, very hard to save these animals in our highlands.
So we learnt that we have greater gliders up on the Jib and we have them on Gibbagunya. And we saw one out in Mittagong out the back of Lake Alex.
Mount Alexandra. That's where we saw one.
Yep.
We went with the spotlighters, and what a cutie. Oh, not allowed to say that. Not allowed to say that.
Gotcha.
But he got a white face.
Yes.
Little white face and dark body, and I couldn't see the tail.
No, I don't think there was a bit of it, but not a lot.
It was tricky to see. But what struck me last month, I think I said that they had furry ears, and then I thought, I wonder if everyone thinks they got furry ears inside and outside their ears. Obviously, they're only furry on the outside. But what I really noticed this time looking at this greater glider was the sort of corrugations of skin on the inside of the big ears.
You could see better than I could.
Oh, yeah, I could see really well. I have binoculars, and I thought those corrugations, they reminded me of some of the corrugations I've seen in the ears of some of the bigger bats. And I think it's
we're really getting into it now.
Well, I just think it's about being able to pick up very, very precise sounds, maybe small sounds, and the area from which they come, the left, the right, the top, above you, below you. It's like a very good hearing system, I think they've got, you know?
I imagine you're right.
Yeah, so I was dead impressed with them.
And
the ears.
I was just impressed with the whole night walk experience. I've done a few spotlighting tours in my time, and this one was by far the best, in part because it was really well organised and people had been advised not to use flash photography and to keep their torches off the animals. I've read and heard a number of times that nocturnal animals have very sensitive eyes and that bright lights really do them harm, and actually in some cases render them temporarily blind, so they're vulnerable to predators at that time. And so when I've done spotlighting walks, it's really kind of horrified me how many lights and how many flashes go off on these poor creatures.
I want to do some research about infrared, because I think if you use an infrared, maybe that's okay.
I think so, because Monica, one of the leaders, she had the fantastic infrared binos that she could put up and look at the animal, and then that fed back to an iPad that we could all have a look at.
Yeah, that was extraordinary. I'd never seen that technology.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
So you could look on the computer and see the animal that was way up in the canopy in the in night time.
Yeah, and seemingly without doing him or her any harm. Yeah. It was
the
just
other thing
great.
that struck me about that spotlighting tour, we didn't just see the glider, we saw several sugar gliders.
Yeah.
And what struck me was the glider didn't do anything, the greater glider.
No.
But the sugar gliders were zipping around like crazy. And it suddenly occurred to me, this is all to do with their diet.
All right.
Because the greater glider is a bit like a koala. It eats gum leaves, which with their toxicity and everything really slows you down.
All right.
Whereas the sugar gliders eat nectar and sugary gum.
Oh, so
Exudate. So they're speeding up. They're on a sugar hit all the time, and they're going yang 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 yang.
They certainly were the ones that we saw, and they were
were.
even zipping around on the ground.
I know, which is unusual.
It was just like, I just thought this was a wonderland.
And we only went for 100 meters.
Yes, and there was so much stuff out
So
there.
much
It was
stuff.
wonderful, and it's a pity that people don't get out at night,
Yes.
spotlighting more often, because there's all this
It's
shit
a
going down out there.
whole different world, isn't it?
It is,
This is when all our animals actually come out.
Yeah, that's right. So it was just a great night, and apparently there were lots of people who wanted to book for that spotlighting tour. We were some of the lucky ones, but they will be doing some more again come spring. And, I highly recommend it. It was wonderful.
Yes, I would too. It did book out quite quickly. Not surprisingly, it was free.
Yes.
It was free. I mean, you don't get shows like that very often for nothing.
No, that's right. Lou, winter is coming and we're going to start facing frosts in the Highlands. I really like the appearance of a frost. It's just, for me, a pleasure of living in the Highlands. But is frost all good? Like, I know I've lost the odd plant.
Well, yes, not so great for some plants, but they do vary quite a lot. So frost is basically a soft white ice crystal that develops close to the ground. And when we lose the heat at night time, no sun, no warmth, temperature drops down. The temperature of the ground becomes much lower than the temperature in the air. And when that temperature hits zero, it is going to make the vapor in the air turn to frost crystals. So that's how come you get that deposit on the fields and things. But sometimes, you'll get it maybe on the car, but you won't get it on the path under the car. So different materials have different levels at which they become frost, if you like.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so a metal
When they
is
freeze. Yeah.
when they freeze, that's right. So we sometimes get frost hollows. That's when the cold air, which is always heavier than the warm air, slid underneath the warm air closer to the sun that isn't there, or the moon, and it just slides on down into the hollow, into a valley floor, where frost can form and the hills remain absolutely fine. No frost at all.
I read that it moves like water.
Yes, and I've actually seen it slide. You can sometimes see it sliding down a slope into the valley. And that's the cold air, which is basically heavy. And so that's why it's sliding down below the air that's warmer above. So for plants, it's not a good thing. Plants will freeze from frost. Sometimes it's just the soil that freezes. Sometimes it's the tips of the plants that freeze. The real problem is when the roots freeze. You do not.
Right. Yeah.
That
Because
really
I
is cactus time.
I lose plants to frost every year.
Yes, and it does depend on the severity and how long the freezing time is. And some plants, like the cold climate plants, many of which we have here in the highlands, they can actually survive rather better because they have this mechanism, this evolutionary mechanism called dormancy. They sort of like bed down for the winter. They not only lose their leaves, but they also stop the amount of water in their branches and in their trunk and so on and so forth. So there's less to freeze. And they actually have a sort of antifreeze in there.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So I read that the mechanism, what's causing the harm is that the liquid inside the cells of the plants freezes and actually splits the cell wall.
Yeah.
So
It explodes.
It explodes. It might be a bit graphic, darling. It breaks down the cell wall. So it's irretrievable damage, isn't it?
Well, not always. I mean, but if you're getting to that point, and different plants, like fruit trees can take, I think, up to about -6 centigrade.
Oh, right.
After which they are liable to die. But on the whole, frost often isn't a problem. It's there and it might make the tips go a bit black, but hang in there. Don't do anything. Don't cut the tips off, because then you really are exposing the little branches to water in the cells. And next frost, they could come again and do it more fiercely. So the best thing is just to hang in there. But, you know when something's dead, don't you? I mean, it's probably happening at the root level.
And what about protecting plants from frost?
Yeah, you can do a lot of things, actually. If you've got little seedlings, you can just put a plastic bottle over them. Because frost doesn't occur when there's a good cloud cover. The cloud cover creates a blanket, preventing that warm air rising and leaving the atmosphere. So if you can create...
it makes the warm air a further blanket.
Yeah, so your job is to make an artificial blanket for your plants. So some people will put hessian over them. You can put shade cloth over them. So you can literally pick up your pot plants, put them under a tree, which will act, maybe a big tree that will act like a blanket. So there are a number of things that you can do to save your plants, really. Mulch is another thing that you can do. That does, to some degree, stop the frost reaching down into the soil and therefore into the roots. It can just be a little surface frost.
And choose your plants carefully.
Well, with many plants, I think if you've got a heart's desire plant and you know that it has a propensity for frost, if you take care of it the first couple of winters, very often that's all you need.
Yes, I've found that. If I nurse them through, they will.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be put off. I mean, if something's heavily frost prone, maybe hold off. When they tell you it's going to be 3 tonight, the ground temperature is often lower.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so you might get a frost with only 1 or 2 degrees in the air. It might be freezing at the ground level.
Yeah. So one thing that I read that I didn't know was that because these are little ice crystals, that some gardeners kind of take advantage of the fact that a frost is coming and they break up the soil, they turn it over and leave it in kind of loose clumps, and if it's dry they dampen it down a bit, and then when the frost comes the ice formation actually breaks up the soil for them, so that after a frost or a few frosts in a row they actually have soil which is more friable because the water as it's frozen has expanded and broken down the soil. Oh, so that's news to you?
Yeah, it is news to me. Yeah.
And another thing, I read what they refer to as a killing frost will help check rodent populations and prevent the spread of cane toads, kill some undesirable weeds, break the breeding cycle of pests such as fruit fly, and can even help kill pathogenic fungal spores, limiting reinfection.
Yes, well, I guess it's going to knock things out.
Yeah.
Anything that's living.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to mention was that if you live in Wingecarribee and you're interested in nature and what's happening in nature, you might want to have a look at the Wingecarribee Council website, particularly the page called Participate Wingecarribee. They are looking at the moment at a number of management plans that they're up for review, and some of the examples are they're looking at the plan of management for community land and reserves, for council operations, environment policy. They're looking at transport, emissions, weed management, quite a lot of stuff that has implications for nature. So if you have any interest in what's going on in nature in Wingecarribee, and I hope there's lots of you out there who do, please have a look at that page and wade through the documentation in case there's something in there that you would like to comment on.
I was given a hint about some ways that you can participate in these plans of management. And it is not to go half-cock about you've got this completely wrong and what we should be saying is blah, blah, blah. That really will get you nowhere, I am told. But if you want to insert a few words like "and the environment" or something on the end of a sentence, that kind of thing really has a very good chance of making it in if there are enough people who suggest that. So it is important not to get completely sort of carried away with rewriting a document that, after all, has been...
People have spent a lot of time on.
Spent a lot of time. They are not going to appreciate it if you just come out of left field with a whole lot of contrary suggestions. But a few insertions here in the relevant places is something that I've been told they might consider including.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Things happening in June. Well, it's cold and wet and wintry, and so as you might predict, there's not a whole lot happening in June. There are definitely all the continuing working bees that are routine. So Berrimah Wildlife Reserve Land Care Group, for example, will be meeting at least twice during the month of June. Southern Highlands Land Care has got a working bee in Canyon Lee on Thursday the 6th. There's a project to rebuild the Mount Jalor Trig Station right at the top of Mount Jalor. That's an ambitious project. That's on Saturday the 15th. The Mount Gibraltar Reserve Working Group will be out on Thursday the 20th and Thursday the 13th. And up in Wallandilly, the Stone Quarry Creek Bush Tucker Garden Working Bee happens 8:30 to 10:30 on the first Friday of the month. So if you want to check the details of any of those things, have a look at the Going Wilds in the Highlands Facebook page. We'll pin our June calendar to the top of that page. You can check out the details on those various activities and any more that we add between now and the date that we publish it. I've been going to the Berrimah Land Care Group Working Bees there twice a month, and I really love it. This is in a little tiny patch in Berrimah. I think it's about 18 acres. And at the moment what we're doing is working on cutting back blackberry, which has been sprayed sometime back in the day. So it's now quite just dry and dead and easy enough to trim back. And we're just releasing all these plants from these horrible cages of blackberry, and it's really rewarding. I love every minute of it. And we're seeing lots of birds while we're out there, lots of kangaroos.
I love the philosophy of the leader, Jen, at that particular land. Well, it's not. Is it a land care group or a bush care group?
I'm not
I'm
sure.
not sure.
The Berrimah Working Bee people, let's call them that.
Yes. Well, I like, the old-fashioned bush care kind of philosophy was you start at a good patch and you work in from the good patch, and then you just keep that good patch good. And if you can make it a little bit further progress into the bad patch, then great.
Well and good.
But you must keep the good patch, which is a great idea, and I've always worked that way. But I think Jen's idea it's got something to it, something else, where she says pick a tree, a good tree, a lovely tree, and work your way around the circumference of this tree, weeding out the bad weeds and freeing it and freeing up all the native bush around it. And then you can go back and you can look at your tree, which has suddenly become your tree, and you can just watch it and know that, like, that is one area. Yeah, I think it's just got something emotional about it.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm kind of amazed. So, anybody can do this stuff. Don't feel that you've got to be super fit or super healthy. You can work at your own pace. You can pick your little spot to work in, or you can work with a mate. And they're achieving great things up down there at Berrima, but we could do with more people, and we have fun. It's good.
Yeah, and it's a great way to get to know your local people around you and, catch up on the local goss and just, talk about things that are of interest to us.
Yeah. But if you do it, wear sturdy clothing, you're dealing with blackberries.
Yeah, blackberries are a shocker, aren't they?
This is a bit of a save the date, folks. On the 1st of August, there's going to be a big community meeting called What's Killing Our Trees. Lou,
That's right.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, we've talked a lot about the things that have been happening here on the highlands with the dying trees. We see them a lot on paddocks, in the boundary fences, but also in people's gardens. And we've researched it and we have found what it is that really is stressing our trees and killing our trees. It's a story that most of you may have worked out to a point, but it's more complex than we thought. And so we're going to have a community forum at the Mittagong RSL on Thursday, the 1st of August at 2 p.m. And we have invited Dr. Brett Summerall, who is the acting CEO, if you please, of the Royal Botanic Gardens. His usual role is Chief Research Scientist, and he is a man who knows about fungi and has made a whole career out of learning about the sorts of things that have been killing our trees. There is also going to be another speaker from the Department of Primary Industries, the chappie who actually helped us unfold this whole story of what was really happening, because it wasn't easy to do. And there are going to be other people there speaking briefly from the council and probably the local land services as well. But the real happy news is that although this is maybe a disaster now, we have an opportunity here. We have a really wonderful opportunity to do things better in the future. And so it will be about future-proofing the land, whether it's your garden, the paddocks, in the bush. There are things that we can do and we must do. And so we would like to invite everybody, absolutely everybody who has any interest in what's been killing their trees, to come along and listen to these experts. So save the date, guys.
All right, we look forward to it. That'll do us for June, I think. We're going to just do a little bit less throughout the winter months in terms of producing material. We just need a little bit of a slowdown, a little bit of a break. We'll still be producing a certain amount, but just not quite as much. You can find us on Highland FM at 8 p.m. on Monday nights, or anytime on their website under podcasts. You can find us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Our numbers for podcasts are improving, Lou. It's very gratifying. We're also on YouTube, where we have gorgeous, gorgeous photos that are provided to us by local nature photographers. We're so grateful for them. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Going Wild in the Highlands. Floss Wild has also got a page on Facebook. Our email address is flossandlou@gmail.com. Thank you to Highland FM for sponsoring us, particularly Adam, who encourages us to drink while we're on the radio, and Warren and Harrison. And a big thank you to our photographers this month. I think I've got it right. I've got Jeff, Mustafa, Tony, Alan, the two Louises, Nigel, Jenny, Linda, Lorraine, Trevor and Matthew. If I've failed to mention you, please forgive me. We'll see you again in July. Bye.
Bye now.